Welcome to lesson number 4 in our study of the book of Daniel. In this lesson, we'll be looking at chapter 4, and this will be the last we'll see of Nebuchadnezzar in the book. Something that makes this chapter unique is that it's the only chapter in Scripture composed entirely under the authority of a pagan. Nebuchadnezzar himself is the speaker, and the chapter consists of a letter, copied without editorial or comment directly into the text of the book. It was a circular or cyclical letter. It was intended to be read to all the subjects of the empire. Now, this form of correspondence was normally used to publicize new laws, decrees, taxes, etc. However, it is used here for a remarkable confession by Nebuchadnezzar of the supremacy of a foreign god over the Babylonian Empire and its rulers. And if chapters 2 and 3 in the book of Daniel describe Nebuchadnezzar's education in the nature of Daniel's God, chapter 4 would be his valedictory address. There is some interesting literary phenomena within the text of this letter. First, the story is narrated from two different points of view. Verses 1 through 18, the opening confessional and the description of the dream, and verses 34 through 37, the aftermath of Nebuchadnezzar's experience and the closing confessional, are written in the first person. The personal pronouns here are I, me, and mine. But verses 19 through 32, or verse 33 rather, the dream's interpretation and its subsequent fulfillment in Nebuchadnezzar's bizarre madness are written in the third person. And here the personal pronouns are he, him, and his. Now it's been suggested, and I'm inclined to agree, that verses 19 through 33 may have been editorially inserted into the text from official records, because Nebuchadnezzar's madness may have prevented him from being a reliable witness to these events. Now, second interesting thing about this chapter is the text alternates between prose and poetry as we move along. The supporting parts of the narrative are written in prose. However, the most significant parts, Nebuchadnezzar's opening and closing confessions and his descriptions of the dream itself, are written in majestic poetry. And again, the date of the events in chapter 4 are not given. Nebuchadnezzar reigned from 605 to 562 BC, and this dream probably came in the later part of his rule, as his wars of conquest and his massive building projects appear to be largely complete. The fruit of his labor did not evoke a spirit of humility or thanksgiving in Nebuchadnezzar, as was the case with King David of Israel. Rather, it stirred up an attitude of pride and arrogance. At this point, Nebuchadnezzar's peace and satisfaction were severely disturbed by this most troubling dream, as he describes it in his own words in chapter 4, verses 1 through 18. Nebuchadnezzar the king, to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language that live in all the earth, may your peace abound. It has seemed good to me to declare the signs and wonders which the Most High God has done for me. How great are his signs, and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house, and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream, and it made me fearful. And these fantasies, as I lay on my bed, and the visions in my head, kept alarming me. So I gave orders to bring into my presence all the wise men of Babylon, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, the conjurers, the Chaldeans, and the diviners came in, and I related the dream to them, but they could not make its interpretation known to me. But finally Daniel came in before me, whose name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, and in whom is a spirit of the holy gods. And I related the dream to him, saying, O Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, since I know that a spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no mystery baffles you, tell me the visions of my dream which I have seen, along with its interpretation. Now these were the visions in my mind as I lay on my bed. I was looking, and behold, there was a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew large and became strong, and its height reached to the sky, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth. Its foliage was beautiful, and its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it, and the birds of the sky dwelt in its branches, and all living creatures fed themselves from it. I was looking in the visions in my mind as I lay on my bed, and behold, an angelic watcher, a holy one, descended from heaven. He shouted out and spoke as follows: Chop down the tree, and cut off its branches. Strip off its foliage, and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts flee from under it, and the birds from its branches. Yet leave the stump with its roots in the ground, but with a band of iron and bronze around it, in the new grass of the field. And let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him share with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let a beast's mind be given to him. And let 7 periods of time pass over him. This sentence is by the decree of the angelic watchers, and the decision is a command of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind, and bestows it on whom he wishes, and sets over it the lowliest of men. This is the dream which I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now you, Belteshazzar, tell me its interpretation, inasmuch as none of the wise men of my kingdom is able to make known to me the interpretation. But you are able, for a spirit of the holy gods is in you. Nebuchadnezzar's procedure in seeking the interpretation of his dream is similar to the one we saw in chapter 2. In this case, however, he didn't withhold the particulars of the dream from his wise men because he remembered them. Nevertheless, the dream defied all the standardized categories and forms of the superstitious arts. The sages simply could not interpret its meaning. The late arrival of Daniel on the scene is not explained, but his counsel, as the chief of the wise men and the only one in whom dwells the spirit of the gods, is now urgently sought out by the king. The imagery of this dream is apocalyptic. Apocalypse is a genre of literature rich in symbolic imagery, which originated during the post-exilic period of Israelite history. The entire second part of the book of Daniel, chapters 7 through 12, is written in the apocalyptic genre. Now, the tree is an apocalyptic symbol of life, fruitfulness, and vitality. With its trunk and branches, it is a symbol often associated with the dynastic continuity of a kingdom. There is possibly a play on words intended here. The Aramaic word for tree is Elan, and it sounds much like the word for gods or deity, which is Elah. And that word Elah is used in verses 2, 8, 9, and 18, as though the tree represented a person, an individual, who fancied himself almost as a god. The growth of the tree to the point that its top reached to the sky also suggests delusions of divine or semi-divine attributes. The branches, visible to the ends of the earth, portray near universal political power. The lush fruit and leaves suggest abundant riches, luxury, and prosperity. All living creatures depending upon the tree for shelter and food typifies complete economic control over the lives of people. The judgment of the tree through the edict of a holy messenger, or literally a watcher, emphasizes the fact that this judgment is from God, not man. There are three parts to this judgment, corresponding to the glorious appearance of the tree. First, cut it down. The myth of divinity is to be stripped away and exposed as a lie. Second, trim off its branches, strip off its leaves, scatter its fruit. Political power and material wealth are to be taken away. Third, let the animals flee, indicating the loss of control over the lives of people. After being deprived of all its glory, the stump with its roots is to be left in the field, bound with iron and bronze, and exposed to the elements. And it's at this point that it becomes clear that the tree does indeed represent a human being. This person will be drenched with dew and live like an animal. Indeed, he will lose all awareness of even being human and believe that he actually is an animal. And he will remain in this condition for 7 times. The Aramaic word idan, which is translated times, designates a predetermined, close-ended period of unspecified duration. The association of 7 times with God's active intervention in human history is perhaps derived from his creation of the universe in 7 days, or 7 times, as the Hebrew of the book of Genesis says it. In this case, however, 7 times indicates a fixed period of time established and known by God alone. When the imagery is understood, the dream becomes virtually self-interpreting. All that is lacking is the identity of the person represented by the tree, and Daniel reveals that in verses 19 through 27. And this is where the narrative transitions to the third person. Then Daniel, whose name is Belteshazzar, was appalled for a while, as his thoughts alarmed him. The king responded and said, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its interpretation alarm you. Belteshazzar replied, My lord, if only the dream applied to those who hate you, and its interpretation to your adversaries. The tree that you saw, which became large and grew strong, whose height reached to the sky and was visible to all the earth, and whose foliage was beautiful and its fruit abundant, and in which was food for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and in whose branches the birds of the sky lodged. It is you, O king, for you have become great and grown strong, and your majesty has become great and reached to the sky, and your dominion to the end of the earth. In that the king saw an angelic watcher, a holy one, descending from heaven and saying, Chop down the tree and destroy it, yet leave the stump with its roots in the ground, but with a band of iron and bronze around it in the new grass of the field, and let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him share with the beasts of the field until 7 periods of time pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king, that you be driven away from mankind, and your dwelling place be with the beasts of the field. And you will be given grass to eat like cattle, and be drenched with the dew of heaven, and 7 periods of time will pass over you, until you recognize that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind, and bestows it on whomever he wishes. And in that it was commanded to leave the stump with the roots of the tree, your kingdom will be assured to you, after you recognize that it is heaven that rules. Therefore, O king, may my advice be pleasing to you. Break away now from your sins by doing righteousness, and from your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, in case there may be a prolonging of your prosperity. Daniel's fear at the meaning of the dream was probably due more to a genuine concern for the welfare of the monarch who had treated him so kindly, rather than for his own personal safety as the bearer of bad news. Nevertheless, Nebuchadnezzar insisted on knowing the truth about the matter, a truth which Daniel wished might rather have applied to the king's enemies. When Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, "It is you, O king," we can't help but remember the prophet Nathan's indictment of King David when he confronted him over his sin with Bathsheba. You are the man. At this point, the dream was only a warning. This is what God had resolutely determined to do if Nebuchadnezzar did not repent of his pride and rule his kingdom responsibly, as one who must give account to a higher authority for the way he had discharged a trust. But Daniel's urgent plea for the king to change his ways indicates that the dream was a vision of what could be, not necessarily what must be. Now, Nebuchadnezzar's immediate response to Daniel's warning is not recorded. Perhaps he took Daniel's words seriously for a while, because it was another 12 months before the dream was actually fulfilled, as we'll read in verse 29. Or perhaps the delay is an illustration of God's grace and patience. At any rate, exactly 1 year after his disturbing dream, we find Nebuchadnezzar wallowing once again in self-aggrandizement, when his life takes a sudden and drastic change of course. We pick up the reading in verse 28. All this happened to Nebuchadnezzar the king. 12 months later, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. The king reflected and said, "Is this not Babylon the Great, which I myself have built as a royal residence by the might of my power and for the glory of my majesty?" While the word was in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven saying, "King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared, sovereignty has been removed from you, and you will be driven away from mankind, and your dwelling place will be with the beasts of the field. You will be given grass to eat like cattle, and 7 periods of time will pass over you until you recognize that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind and bestows it on whomever he wishes." Immediately, the word concerning Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled, and he was driven away from mankind and began eating grass like cattle. And his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair had grown like eagle's feathers and his nails like bird's claws. Extra-biblical historical evidence of Nebuchadnezzar's insanity is scanty, but not non-existent. A Babylonian historian named Berosus, writing about 250 years after the time of Daniel, mentions simply that Nebuchadnezzar was ill for a time before his death. Abydos, in the 2nd century AD, recorded an old Babylonian legend which held that following the completion of his westernmost campaigns, Nebuchadnezzar mounted his royal tower where he was seized by some god. He announced to the Babylonians that the empire would eventually be subjugated by the Persian mule, allied with Media, and with the help of their own Babylonian gods. He prayed that the Persians might be destroyed in the sea or condemned to wander in the wilderness with the wild beasts. He further prayed that he himself would experience a peaceful death before all these calamities came upon Babylon. Immediately after this utterance, according to the tradition, Nebuchadnezzar was snatched away from the sight of men. This legend seems to retain a skewed memory of the historical event recorded in Daniel 4. Most remarkable, perhaps, is a Babylonian inscription from the time of Nebuchadnezzar, discovered by Sir Henry Rawlinson, which was translated as follows: "For 4 years the seat of my kingdom in my city, did not rejoice my heart. In all my dominions I did not build a high place of power. The precious treasures of my kingdom I did not lay out. In the worship of Merodach my lord, the joy of my heart in Babylon, the city of my sovereignty, I did not sing his praises, and I did not furnish his altars, nor did I clear out the canals. We can't say with any certainty that Nebuchadnezzar wrote this inscription, or that the author's 4-year absence from his kingdom corresponds with the 7 times of Nebuchadnezzar's experience described in chapter 4. But the similarities between this inscription and the biblical description of Nebuchadnezzar's madness is striking. The physical symptoms manifested by Nebuchadnezzar sound like those of a mental illness called boanthropy. The victim believes himself to be a cow or some other member of the bovine family and acts accordingly. Modern-day cases of such a disorder are rare, but not unknown. And some specialists have even noted cases in which the delusion seems to have started with a dream and persisted into a real-life pathology. Well, be that as it may, even if Nebuchadnezzar did suffer from a natural illness, he didn't come by it naturally. His madness was divinely decreed by God for a specific reason and for a specific period of time. When the 7 times had passed, Nebuchadnezzar's sanity was restored. This is recorded in verses 34 to 37. And here the text reverts back to the first person. But at the end of that period, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my reason returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, but he does according to his will in the host of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth, and no one can ward off his hand, or say to him, "What have you done?" At that time my reason returned to me, and my majesty and splendor were restored to me for the glory of my kingdom. And my counselors and my nobles began seeking me out. So I was reestablished in my sovereignty, and surpassing greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are true, and his ways are just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride. This postscript to Nebuchadnezzar's account of his dream and its fulfillment reads very much like his introduction in verses 1 to 3. And together they serve as bookends of a sort to the body of the narrative. Most notable to me are the virtually identical confessions in verses 3 and 34. In verse 3, Nebuchadnezzar said, "His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation." And in verse 34, he simply reverses those two phrases for all practical purposes. He says, "For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation." When he says, "I, Nebuchadnezzar, raise my eyes toward heaven," that's a way of saying that he finally recognized and acknowledged that he ruled at the pleasure of God. Once restored to his right mind, Nebuchadnezzar took back the reins of power from whatever interim regime had been running the empire. Now, however, he had a radically different attitude about himself, about the God of Daniel, whom he called the Most High, and about who was really in control of the world. Early in his reign, his sages had said to him that the gods do not live among men, which is another way of stating the ancient belief that the gods did not care about and didn't get involved with the affairs of people and nations on the earth. Now, late in his life, Nebuchadnezzar has learned that he does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. And Nebuchadnezzar's authority and majesty were not diminished in the least as a result of his humility. Rather, he says he became even greater than before. And so, at this point, Nebuchadnezzar exits the stage of biblical history. Through his relationship with Daniel, one of the most powerful kings in history was awakened to the wisdom, the power, and the glory of Daniel's God, and finally acknowledged his own insignificance. Now, it would be overstating the facts as we have them to say that Nebuchadnezzar was ever converted to the exclusive worship of the Most High. Nebuchadnezzar lived and probably died as a polytheistic pagan. But the value of his spiritual awakening, incomplete as it may have been, is the lesson it contains for Daniel, the Jewish people, and all believers everywhere. Above all the corruption, violence, and wickedness we see and experience, God is still sovereign in this world. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. In the next lesson, we'll meet another king of Babylon who awakened to the sovereign power of God, but, tragically, entirely too late.
You will reign forever. Fill the earth. You will reign forever. Fill the earth. You will reign forever. Fill the earth. You will reign forever. Behold our God, seated on his throne. Come, let us adore him. Behold our King. Nothing can compare. Come, let us adore him. Behold our God, seated on his throne. Come, let us adore him. Behold our King. Nothing can come.